We are back with hour number 2 here on today's edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. It is March 4th, 2012. I'm your host, Popeye, from FederalJack.com. And it is my pleasure to bring to the show for the second hour the one, the only, Adam Kokesh. Adam, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me on. But there's actually another Adam Kokesh out there. I hate to break it to you. Somewhere in my extended family, there's another Adam Kokesh. I'm not the only one.
So you are, I guess we'd have to change it from the one, the only to the bigger, the badder, the mouthier Adam Kokesh?
One of a few unremarkables would be sufficient for me and my ego, I hope.
I have to say, man, you really do deserve the respect that a lot of people have for you, especially veterans such as myself, because you, the outreach that you have to get veterans to come together across all races, ages, and services is amazing. What I saw you pull off in D.C. with your crew of people that helped put it together, I got to say, bravo, Zulu, dude, just massively impressive.
Well, I appreciate that, thanks. And it was an organizing feat, but as an organizing feat, it was, an idea and an execution. But what really made that possible was Ron Paul. It was Ron Paul, and in a sense, it's not Ron Paul because it's something, obviously, as you know, something deeper than that. But really, it's the message, and it's Ron Paul's ability to convey the message of liberty that inspires people to come out and support him with absolute confidence in his commitment to those ideals, to the non-aggression principle, to self-ownership, to individual freedom, to the Constitution even. And that commitment has been demonstrated so meticulously, so thoroughly over the last decades of his career that when people hear him say this, they know that he means what he says and that he has the commitment to back it up. But, he's just a messenger, as he said, and he is not the perfect messenger. But, one of the coolest things I've ever heard about Ron Paul, and of course, not to get on the defensive, but about when this thing came out, the accusation of racism. And of course, it was absurd. He admitted that the grain of credibility to it was his failure and oversight. And I think it was big of him to admit that. But the coolest thing I ever heard coming out of that whole fiasco, that whole attempted smear campaign by the media, was from a black person online, because that was, the racism was supposedly anti-African American, and it was from a black guy on YouTube saying, "I don't care if he is personally racist. I have such commitment and confidence in him, and such confidence in his commitment to his ideals, that even if he personally hated me, even if he hated me for everything I did and for the color of my skin, it wouldn't matter, because if I'm not violating the rights of anybody else, I have absolute confidence that he is going to respect my rights as an individual human being, not as a member of any class or race or group of people." And that's the power of Ron as a messenger, and the power of the message to bring people together, is that it really transcends those things. And the thing that Ron said about it is that it transcends race, because the message is about not grouping people together as, members of a class or members of a race, but rather recognizing the inherent dignity of every single human being. And that really sets it apart. And, that's what made the march possible. So that's why people came together. But we're going to make that one look like a warm-up when we march on Tampa.
Yeah, so what are your plans for Tampa? You guys pretty much plan on doing the same thing, holding the same type of ceremony, letting the politicians, the bloodsuckers inside, know who the troops really support, and it's none of them?
Well, I'll give you guys the exclusive sneak peek here, because we are going to be launching this as a coordinated promotional effort in the next few days here. So we're really looking forward to that. So please stay tuned. There will be a website going up at ronpaulisthechoiceofthetroops.com. There's nothing there now. We're going to have the major call to action going out in the next couple of days. So we're really excited about that. But what we're going to be doing is creating a FOB, a forward operating base for veterans for Ron Paul. outside the convention, hopefully close by, walking distance at least. And we plan on being there with a positive message as Veterans for Ron Paul, lobbying. We're asking veterans to come down for the entire duration of the convention, to be present with signs. I'm thinking our best slogan is going to be another veteran for Ron Paul, because we want to have the convention surrounded. We want to be able to have our presence known and make it clear that Ron Paul is the choice of the troops. And we want to do this in a non-confrontational way. We just want to be a swarm of individuals who are veterans, who believe in this message, who will distribute material, who will hold signs, and politely as possible lobby the delegates at the convention. And this is what's going to be so essential to getting Ron Paul elected, because, as you know, when delegates go to the convention, they're bound, in most cases, by their state convention results or their state caucus or state primary results to vote a certain way, but only in the first round of voting. And if there's not a decisive nominee after the first round of voting, then you have a brokered convention. But it's such a bad establishment perspective term for it, the very term brokered convention. And in a sense, yes, it's the real power brokers and powers that be within the party that are in charge at that point and can kind of manipulate the process to their will if they want. But really what happens is the delegates become unbound and allowed to vote their conscience and vote whoever they want. And so that, or rather, what they would think of as for the good of the party, at least that's the idea, that if the nominating process from state by state doesn't result in a clear nominee after the first round of voting, then the delegates are supposed to take the initiative in the second round of voting and come together and choose one. And so by part of the campaign's official strategy is to have as many of our people in position so that when the delegates become unbound, they go, oh, well, guess what? We're not negotiating. We're voting for Ron Paul. We're not going to play games. We're not going to, be bought off or anything. We want to vote for Ron Paul. And according to the campaign, they're still second in the delegate count, and it seems highly unlikely. I don't want to, it's still a mathematical possibility, but it's given the polling, a near statistical impossibility that Ron Paul will have the delegates in place to clinch it, so to speak, to win the first round of voting. The good news about that is that it's such a split convention, neither will any of the other candidates. And this is why having this effort there is going to be so crucial, because we are also going to be marching in formation on Monday, the first day of the convention. We will be marching to the convention center for a demonstration of our support in a polite, non-disruptive way. We're gonna do a formation march. We're gonna be loud. We're gonna have our voices heard. We're gonna make our presence known, and that's as much for the media as anybody else. But we're gonna get, we're gonna make sure that everybody knows we're there. We're gonna make sure that no one can deny this, and everyone has to consider when they go to that second round of voting. Everyone will know that Ron Paul is the choice of the troops, and if they want to vote for any candidate who doesn't happen to have more campaign contributions from active duty troops than all other candidates combined, then they're going to have to do it in front of the whole world, and they're going to have to do it right in our faces and show the world that they don't actually support the troops, that they don't even want to listen to the veterans. So that's our strategy. That's our plan. There's a lot of other moving parts to that, as you can imagine, that are coming together right now. And basically, as soon as we have everything in place, we're going to be rolling out our primary announcement next week, and we hope to have everybody on board then helping to spread the word and raise the funds to make this possible and get as many veterans to Tampa as we possibly can.
Well, I'm going to do my best to, as soon as you guys get your website up, let me know. See if your web guys can do some banners and stuff, and not only will I put them up on my website, Federal Jack, but I'll make sure
absolutely
everybody else puts them up, and we'll spread the word, brother. We'll get it out, and we'll have as many vets down there to show them that we're serious and this is not a joke. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get cut off by the break. We'll be back in 3 minutes. Stay tuned. More with Adam Kokesh. We are back, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm hanging out with Adam Kokesh, and I got to tell you something. I've talked to him off air, and there's conversations I've had with him you guys aren't privy to. But I have to tell you, and I've already told him this off air. He's the real deal. He's not. Everybody in this that's ever gotten involved and tried to stand up always gets at one point or another the finger pointed at them and said, "You're a shill. You're fake. Whatever. I've had it. I don't care. That's just stupid." But I got to tell you, Adam is the real deal. He is so passionate that he believes he doesn't. He puts his morals and what's right before he puts his own checkbook. Okay, and that alone I respect. So, Adam, I got to say again, man, thank you for what you do because it's inspiring. On days I've been doing this for a long, long time, and on days I have a bad day, I see things like you guys with the march in D.C. It fills me back up. It recharges my meter, and I'm ready to go.
Good. No, I hope it has that effect. And what's really exciting about this event coming up for the RNC, Veterans for Ron Paul marching on the RNC in August. Well, just to give you a sense of the scale of this thing and what this is going to be, what we're about to launch really in the next few days. Because I announced it at the after party at the first march at the White House, but we didn't really have a plan. We just knew we could do it. We were feeling really confident. We were feeling like we had an incredible group of people behind us for this event. But the first event, the March on the White House, we had 320 veterans and active duty troops. And my guess was that about a fifth of the formation was active duty, and that's conservative. I talked to my squad leaders who were the ones that actually went down every squad and verified everybody's proof of service in that formation. And they're saying closer to 25%, I think. But 20% is still a good conservative guess that there were that many that were active duty troops in our formation, which is really saying something, because that means that, even if you want to do the exact math there and say, well, okay, 20%, even being generous, of 320, that's only 64 veteran or 64 active duty guys. That's a lot. That's to say that they're going to go to the White House and turn their back on the president. That's more than enough to kick off a mutiny. And we accomplished that, myself and Nathan Cox, pretty much. We're the ones that at least kicked it off. I had this vision, and so I took it to my co-founder first of Veterans for Ron Paul 2012, the Facebook page, and floated it around some places online and sort of honed the idea, and then formally announced it at the party at Jillian's Billiards in New Hampshire on debate night, the Boots on the Ground party up there. And in a month and a half, we had a lot of people jump in. And I don't mean to, really every one of those 320 that were in the formation are the ones that deserve the credit for making it the event that it was. And by the way, there were some active duty guys there that stayed out of the formation. There were a couple of squads from Fort Meade that decided to come down and say, well, we're going to observe this particular interpretation of the regulations, and we're going to be here as observers in civilian attire. And so they played it safe that way. But basically, starting with two guys, in a month and a half, we raised a brigade or a battalion of veterans and soldiers to turn their backs on Obama in repudiation of his foreign policy because they were brought together by their support for Ron Paul. Now we have 6 months, and we have a much more compelling mission. We are not sending a message. We are not trying to make a point. We are going to the RNC to accomplish a mission, and that mission is to ensure that Ron Paul is the next commander-in-chief of our armed forces. And this may be the last time that anybody on this earth gets to march for Ron Paul. This may be the last time in his career. If we don't do this, this may be the last chance we ever get to support this man who has done more for the message of freedom than in his lifetime than anybody I think will ever hope to in human history. Because I think after Ron Paul, look what Ron Paul has done. The cascade effect will have started. The ideas are too compelling. As he has said, the message of liberty is an idea whose time has come that cannot be stopped by any army. And it's really just a matter of time at this point. The cat's out of the bag. As bad as things may get with government and society in the next 10, 20 years, we have turned that corner philosophically. We have figured this one out. Liberty is the only moral way to have society organized. And it's happening and it's coming. But we can do this the easy way or the hard way. We can elect someone like Ron Paul who can see it coming, who can ease us out of it, who can manage that transition, who can properly dismantle government in a way that doesn't hurt people. Or we can watch the thing collapse and see social upheaval, and we can see people get fooled into supporting new schemes of government and new foolish mechanisms of exploitation that we see in government, like the Federal Reserve System is the one prime example. And people will fall for it if the message isn't out there, if we haven't built that consensus, if we haven't taken advantage of this opportunity to promote Ron Paul. And I hate to make it about one person, because it's not. But what he has created in himself and in his candidacy is an opportunity that has never existed before in human history and will never exist again.
I agree. And with this new, what's it called? The trespass bill. Mm-hmm. You might not be able to even have the First Amendment outside an event such as the RNC anymore.
Well, I think the language there is protesting. And
yeah,
it's
true.
a good thing we're not protesting. We are not protesting. We are not causing disruption. We are making a public demonstration of a positive sentiment that we, the troops, support Ron Paul. And, of course, I don't speak for the troops. But that legislation would not stop us anyways.
No. Oh, I know it wouldn't. But you know what? I mean, the balls on these guys, because for real, I don't recall any of them ever taking an oath to defend that very right. I don't recall. I mean, well, actually, I recall them taking that oath when they stepped into Congress, but or whatever political realm, senator or whatever. But I don't recall many of them ever actually strapping on a uniform and taking that oath. But they're willing to just hand it away. And it pisses me off because I know a lot of people died defending that oath. And even if they were used, they died because in their minds, a lot of them were defending that oath. They took that oath seriously. I mean, it just pisses me off to see people's lives wasted like that and used for political purposes. And all of these scumbags, most of them are chicken hawks. And I mean, yep. McCain, I don't really consider him to be such a great guy anyway. I mean, when you research him, he's a tool. So,
well, it's funny about McCain. You can't really call him a chicken hawk. Obviously, he was a POW. He got out there. He had his life on the line, and he demonstrated that, he was taking on a certain amount of risk. But he was, he was a pilot. I don't think he I think he was willing to risk his life, but to endure pain and to endure suffering and to make sacrifices. I don't think it was if he was a grunt and he had gotten shot, or he had stepped on a mine and had lost a leg or two, no one would be like, well, that's what you get for signing up, for the grunts. Like that's what you expect. Being a POW and having the story that he had is a very, very, very rare occurrence for a pilot. But the other thing is, when people talk about having served honorably, that would include your time in service as a prisoner of war. And from all accounts, John McCain, and I was so disgusted that this story didn't get out more during the 2008 election, that by all accounts, he was John Songbird McCain when he was in captivity.
Yeah, actually, I was going to get into that with you. That's why I called him a tool. I was being polite because he did serve, but at the same time, he's a dirtbag because he sung and a lot of people paid for it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back. Stay tuned. More with Adam Kokesh. Don't go anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Adam, I have a question for you. And I know you're a real guy and you shoot right from the hip and speak from the heart, so I'm interested to hear what you have to say. But how do you feel about things like what we were talking about the last segment with McCain? As a Marine, as a veteran, as someone who's seen the horrors of war and seen what could happen, I look at him with such disgust for what he did, because it's like, how could you do that and how could you push for war now knowing what you went through? Even if you sung like a little birdie, how could you push for more people to go through that experience? What kind of sick, twisted bastard is that? It pisses me off to no end. But how do you feel as a Marine and as someone who saw combat? How do you feel about that? Is that you?
Sure. Well, yeah. When it comes to foreign policy, there's two mentalities, and one is the mentality of Henry Kissinger, as so well captured by Woodward when he quoted him for saying, "Military men are like dumb animals to be used as pawns in our foreign policy." And then there's the Ron Paul attitude that is, these are precious human lives on both sides of any conflict, potential conflict. And there are certain rights that are not to be violated. But really, the intellectual arrogance of that position of Henry Kissinger to say that military men are like dumb animals to be used as pawns in our foreign policy is no different than the mentality of statism itself. The idea that someone can be a master planner, and if you're the smart one, then it's you. And really, it's no different to say military men are like dumb animals to be used as pawns in our foreign policy than it is to say we should have a national sales tax to fund Social Security and retirement. Because what you're still saying is that some central planner can use the force of government to manipulate the lives of others, to be in charge of others, and to create a vision for society that is forced on people through government. And some people's vision might be a little nastier than others when it's, hey, we're going to send people all over the world to kill each other, versus, hey, we're going to redistribute some funds here and hope to alleviate some suffering. But again, the mentality is exactly the same, and it is the inherent intellectual arrogance of statism to think that you can be so much better at running someone's life for them that you can initiate force against them.
And initiate force, the Empire does. I got to tell you, dude, just our current state of affairs reminds me a lot of Star Wars, and not because I'm a big Star Wars geek or anything, but when you see how fast, the rights got taken away, and then the Empire went from this good thing to this bad thing, it's really scary to see that happening in my home country. When I grew up, I'm in my 30s. And when I was growing up, the country was a very different place. Not that we weren't already being militarized and, things weren't being twisted, but it was a much different place than it is now. And it just, when I look back, it's like, Jesus, why did all these people die? For what? For this? No, that's not why the Founding Fathers started their thing, and that's not what all those farmers stood up for, so that we could be in the situation we're in 230 some odd years later. It's just, and the average American, sometimes it gets frustrating because the average American is just so asleep. But I honestly, I have to tell you again, like things like the march that you guys pulled off, a lot of older vets who don't know what's going on. When I go to the VA, I always bring DVDs and stuff, and I give them movies, and I give them business cards to my site, and I'm like, check it out. But I was able to rip the videos of the march, and I put it on my phone, and I went down there. I sat with a bunch of old Vietnam vets that they're pretty much on the fence about a few things. I showed them the march, and there was not a dry eye amongst them. And they were all, after that, they were all like, we understand. They just understood at a base level what was going on and why you guys were doing what you did. And it was so powerful, man. So again, that's how we're going to win this. That's how we're going to get past this and educate people, by doing things like that. Because that woke up a bunch of guys. Go ahead.
Can I ask, before I forget, then can I ask you to do me a small favor with that?
Sure.
Because I'm just tickled that we created something not just to make a point, but that, according to your experience, has made a uniquely effective outreach tool. And that's more satisfying to me than making the point. And if you could just write that up on the forums on my website for me, and share that on the record with people in a way that they could see it and say, well, maybe I can do some version of that. Maybe I can take that footage and show it to somebody. And it's funny, it's a lot of fathers, a lot of old dads that for whom this event was the thing. And that's what's really interesting, is that it was the majority, not by a lot, but I think a slim majority, maybe it was around 50% of the veterans there were Global War on Terror era veterans. You know, they were mostly under 30. You know, it seemed like it was mostly a lot of young dudes. And we have to grab the attention of those of the Vietnam generation in particular, but of all the older generations of veterans, and say, look, no, this is still an exploitive scam. And that funny feeling you got when you came home and you started putting the pieces together, even though you didn't finish the puzzle, you should have, because if you kept going, you would have figured out what we have figured out, that these wars are wars of exploitation, and that they're wars for profit, and that what Ron Paul is suggesting as a way to determine when and how we should go to war is the way to prevent this. And I think you're right. When they see that and they feel it, and they feel it as you feel it viscerally, when you see hundreds of veterans chanting President Paul and end the Fed, yeah, it's hard to not have an impact.
I honestly, the strongest thing that not only the President Paul set them up, but the thing that sent them over the edge was as soon as it only took one person saying end the Fed, and the whole formation started saying, I actually played the audio on air, and that was one of the most powerful parts of the whole march, because it was everybody chanting end the Fed, and it was echoing off the buildings as you guys were marching.
Yeah, no, and that was really cool. We were struggling to keep people in step because we had such a large formation, and it was like two different soundscapes, and we didn't have it. The cops were giving us a hassle where we wanted to step off, so we had to form up on the sidewalk, like in this really, really cramped up space, and then get into a formation on the fly. And everybody did it. Everybody remembered enough drill to do that, and it was really cool. But we couldn't get unified really with the cadence until after we stopped at the White House and stepped off. And for a while with the megaphone, I was calling President Paul. And then from the back of the formation, you're right, it was end the Fed. And it was when, normally it's end the Fed, end the Fed. Well, we did it in a marching cadence, just slightly different rhythm. And it was end the Fed, end the Fed. And it kept everybody in step for the next part of the march. It was really powerful. But you're right that there was something about that when you see, why are veterans chanting end the Fed? What the hell is going on here? But if you get it, even in the slightest, and the statement is, because we've been to war, we get the financial exploitation, you go, holy crap. That's what really is behind all modern major war, isn't it? And it just, you wake up to that. You can't go back to sleep.
I agree. Once you wake up, you can't turn your head and go, well, I'll just look the other way. I couldn't. And I was a volunteer firefighter in New Jersey on that day. And I have my own. It took me a while to even look at 9/11 because I had survivor's guilt for well over a year. And that's something that's really hard to get through. And once I was able to look at 9/11 with a fresh set of eyes, because there was always a few things I thought were hinky. And I started looking at it, and my jaw hit the floor. And the more I questioned, and the more I tried to prove people like I am, like myself or you that say, hey, look, 9/11's a little shady, you need to look at it. I was trying to prove people like us wrong. So I was like, no, you guys are crazy. Look, I know they wouldn't have done that. And then the more I looked into it, the more I was proven wrong. And then I was like, well, okay. But you have to make that step where you accept it. You know what I mean? That's the big, I always say all the time, the only way we're going to get past anything is to accept that we have a problem. First step to getting over the Iraq war and not having a war with Iran is to admit that we were wrong in the first place with Iraq, and then we can go from there. But until we admit that we were wrong, we're not going to be able to get there. All right, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We're going to get cut off by the break. Final segment with Adam coming up. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss it. We are back, ladies and gentlemen, with the final segment of today's episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. I have to tell you, 2 hours flies by real fast. And when you have a guest on like Adam, even an hour just woof, goes right by. You blink.
I just can't shut up sometimes.
Yeah, dude, I that's why I like having people like you on, because when you come on my show, the way I run my show is a little different than other hosts. Other hosts like to kind of, be the big man in the room. If I bring someone on, it's because I want you to talk to my listeners. So I have
Yep.
no problem shutting up and, giving the guest the floor. In fact, I'm going to do so with the final segment here. First, Adam's going to give you guys a story he wanted to recite.
Good.
And then we're
Yeah, I
going
got-
into some future stuff. So, Adam, the floor is yours, my brother.
Sure, I've got a story that, at least according to the interwebs, has never been told like this before, because we've heard the story of Nobuo Fujita, and we've heard the story of Richard Kelly, but never in proper context together. And during the Battle of Iwo Jima, Richard Kelly was there with the soldiers charging to the mountaintop, and he saw a lot of his buddies die in that battle. But a couple years later, a warrant flying officer of the Imperial Japanese Navy, Nobuo Fujita, flew a float plane from a long-range submarine aircraft carrier over Brookings, Oregon. This is the only air assault on the American mainland ever in our history. And he dropped 2 incendiary bombs with the objective of creating massive forest fires that would draw the military back from the Pacific to help out with putting out these massive forest fires. The reason you probably haven't heard of the story is because the plot didn't work. It had been raining. There were some very alert fire lookouts on duty that day who were able to control the blaze until a team came and responded and put them out. But the point of all of this is that later, years after the war, in fact, it was, I believe, 1962, the Japanese pilot was invited back to visit Brookings, Oregon, by some people in the city. And it created some controversy, as you can imagine. The people's wounds from the war were still fresh. People still remembered very, very directly. The participants in World War II were all still around, as opposed to today when most of them have passed. And in 1962, he came, and the Japanese government was assured that he wouldn't be tried as a war criminal first, that he was there as a guest. And he brought his 400-year-old family samurai sword. And imagine that. There aren't a lot of families in America that have heirlooms that go back 400 years. And the samurai sword is probably the most prized possession of a family when you've had one for 400 years. And what we didn't find out until after the story, and of course there was some controversy, but he was greeted by the people there. He was welcomed, and he had a chance to express his regret for what he did. This was the annual Azalea Festival, and they made him the local hero. They made him the guest of honor. And what we found out later was that if they had not accepted his sword, if they had not welcomed and accepted his apologies, he was prepared to ceremoniously disembowel himself in the Japanese samurai tradition of harakiri. And he didn't, fortunately. He became an ambassador to Brookings, and he said that it was a measure of his regret and an apology for what he was doing during the war. And it's, if you boil it down, it's like, hey, sorry I did try to kill everybody around here, a couple decades ago. My bad. But he came with such regret that if he had not been invited back, if he had not been received, if he had not received that reception, that apology, that welcoming, he would have rather killed himself than face that the consequences of his actions and face the guilt of those who survived his attack. But at the same time, there was an outcry. But one of the people who missed it was Richard Kelly, and he missed it until he moved to Brookings decades later. And he'd never written a complaint letter in his entire life until he wrote one to the Brookings Public Library where they kept the sword in a display case. And he was outraged. And he wrote a letter. And he said his wife said, "What are you making a big fuss about?" But by the time I finished typing the letter of complaint for him, she was in tears because she understood. As he said, "I fought too long and too hard for the United States of America to see an enemy attacker being glorified with public money." He said when he was on Iwo Jima with the Marines, it was a bloodbath. And 60 years later, he still can't bring himself to take the shrink wrap off the movie, The Sands of Iwo Jima. But what he made, or what he realized eventually, was that he had been living with survivor's guilt from Iwo Jima for the past 60 years. And it wasn't any angst towards this samurai sword or the glorification of some Japanese pilot who had powerfully come to acknowledge his regret for what he had done and what he had been a part of. And once he got over that survivor's guilt, as he said, quote, "I started looking at the sword situation down there, and I realized that it's ancient history." And now he's a volunteer at that public library and is responsible for the maintenance of the display case with the samurai sword. And the reason I say all of this, the point of all of this, is that we're about to go to war with Iran. And in 100 years from then, heck, 50 years from the end of that war, as the old men who were veterans of that combat are dying, if they are so lucky as these two gentlemen are, or were, to come to their peace before they died, they will be able to look back the same way that these two did and see the futility of war and see the silliness of it and the ridiculousness of it. And I can't imagine that in this day and age, in freaking 2012, in the age of the internet, when we have this historical perspective and we can share little stories like this, that war isn't completely obsolete should be a massive frickin' embarrassment to every human being on this planet. It is obscene. It is absurd. The fact that we still fall for this crap from governments every single time. We allow them to whip us up into a frenzy and go kill people on the other side of the planet without remorse. It is the greatest destructive force that humanity has ever known. The systematic destruction of human lives by machinery. War is nothing more than that. To think that we can't see this historical perspective now and say, not again, not ever again, none of this bull crap, I don't think so. We're not going to go through this. We can be friends without having to have the war first.
It's like I was saying about Iraq, dude. People have to accept that we were wrong. And there's so many people out there that they just don't want to accept that. We can't have been wrong. It couldn't. That means all those kids, they died in vain. Yeah. Why do you think we're all so agitated about it? You think any of us are happy? No. Why do you think we're all pissed? That should piss everybody off. The amount of human life that's been wasted on both sides is disgusting. And it's for what? None of us have benefited. The only people that have benefited are these elite few that own the companies like Halliburton. And it's disgusting how many troops died protecting empty trucks that they would just end up blowing up because they got a flat tire. But you lost 4 guys defending that truck before it got the flat tire. And then they just blow it up because, hey, it got a flat. So why did those 4 guys have to die? That's the kind of thing that pisses me off. Adam, we're almost out of time, so go ahead and plug the upcoming events and everything that you want to plug. You got about a minute and a half. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Well, stay tuned. Next week, we're going to be launching a website at ronpaulisthechoiceofthetroops.com, as well as a Facebook event page for the action on the RNC. And I really almost shouldn't be talking about this before all this stuff is up so that people can go and promote it. But please check out adamversustheman.com. You'll get plugged in by following what's going on there. There's some links up there that are important about getting to the Facebook page for Veterans for Ron Paul 2012. That's the main hub right now. Soon there will be an event page for the Veterans for Ron Paul action on the RNC. And when we get that up, we're going to need all the help we can sharing it. I'm looking to start a podcast myself as part of my production operation here. For your guests that don't know, I am one of the proud few who get to say I make YouTube videos for a living, and I really appreciate the support of everybody who makes that possible by donating to support my channel, AdamVersusTheMan.com/invest. And like I said, I'm going to be expanding to a podcast here shortly. We're looking tentatively at a launch date of Monday. I think it's the 19th. So stay tuned for that. Really looking forward to getting back into that and covering a broader range of topics every day. So again, AdamVersusTheMan.com. Get ready for the announcement for the Veterans for Ron Paul March on the RNC. It's going to be epic.
Thank you for all listening.